Former President Donald Trump watched the Ultimate Fighting Championship in New York on Saturday alongside Kid Rock, Tucker Carlson, and UFC President Dana White. Of course, Joe Rogan was at the event as well.
The former president's appearance created a buzz on conservative social media. Conservative commentator and host Benny Johnson wrote on X, "My politics is whatever this is." So, Robby, what is this?
It's the UFC Fighting Championship. It was in New York. So a lot of the popular figures in conservative and alternative media there, obviously. I was interested for a couple reasons to see Donald and Tucker together, because remember there was recently this conversation that Donald Trump had with Buck Sexton and Clay Travis about his VP, where Donald said, I get along really well with Tucker, I like him, and yeah, I would be considering him. It was kind of an offhanded remark, but so then it's interesting to see them hanging out together. Also, I wondered if Joe Rogan and Donald Trump were talking because Donald Trump has not been on Rogan's show. He clearly wants to be on Rogan's show. I think we've heard that his people have reached out many times, and Rogan has so far said he doesn't want to have Trump on because he doesn't want to be seen as helping Trump, although obviously he's had on other political candidates and all sorts of people, and it's not necessarily an endorsement. But anyway, he said he doesn't want to have Trump on for whatever reason. So I wondered if they got an opportunity to talk there.
Well, I don't have a full accounting of what political candidates he has had on, but he has notably not had on very many presidential candidates. Back in
we had on Bernie Sanders.
That's what I was about to say. Back in 2020, when Bernie Sanders went on Joe Rogan, the liberal media went crazy, accused Bernie Sanders of basically co-signing anything that Joe Rogan had ever said on his show, and turned what was a really amazing moment, frankly, in terms of getting in front of that enormous working class audience into a dark spot on the campaign. I don't think it actually was, but the mainstream media tried to turn it into that. And at the same time that other campaigns were disavowing Bernie Sanders' choice to go on, Joe Rogan later said on his show that many of them were clamoring to get the same treatment that he did. So notoriously, he seems to be going by his own gut, going along with his own values when he's making decisions about who to have on, as opposed to feeling like he has to give equal time or feeling like he wants just the clicks of having a leading candidate on the show. So it really would be a game-changing move for him to have Donald Trump on the program.
Right. No, it certainly would be. It's interesting. Benny Johnson, who's this kind of very famous, provocative, conservative online personality, says this is my politics. They're being cheered there. You're Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump, Kid Rock. They're being cheered by the audience there. It's interesting to chart the evolution in the Rogan type audience, the UFC people, people who like alternative media, people who don't trust the elites and the mainstream. These are all semi-overlapping circles. I think our show is maybe one of those circles that sometimes overlaps with some of these people, I hope. So it's and obviously Bernie Sanders, as you just pointed out, was the political figure that at one point in time in the not so recent past was the person that a Rogan and a Rogan audience was most excited about. Yet now, so would you dispute that there's an increasingly right-wing flavor of these circles, or is it a kind of is Benny Johnson wrong? Is it, well, these are not necessarily your people; these are independent people?
I'm not sure I quite get the question. Is the MMA UFC
the
audience?
Yeah.
I don't think. No, I don't. I think that they've always been a conservative audience. I think that many conservatives, however, polls indicate support a living wage and health care for all, and that's why Joe Rogan supported Bernie Sanders, because most Americans want these things. It's not really a left position. It's a common sense position. These are services that everyone else in the industrialized world gets. People in Israel are enjoying free health care, while America sends $3 to $4 billion of aid there every year. And increasingly, people are frustrated. And you're seeing this reflected, I think, in more elected conservatives who are willing to say, should this military funding keep going out of the door when we have domestic concerns at home, even while they refuse to spend domestically, as we saw over the fight over every nickel and dime in the Build Back Better COVID relief program, et cetera. But if no one on the elected left is really going to say much of that, at least in positions of power, there are a handful of squad members. But if the left is being represented by Joe Biden at this moment, who is lockstep with the Republican and Democratic establishment both, yeah, then the only airing you're going to have of any of these ideas is with someone like Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump is nowhere near, I think, where the public is on a lot of the issues that are motivating folks right now. But that's part of why I think it would be interesting to hear him pressed on Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan has made a lot of statements that are sympathetic to the genocide ongoing in Gaza. He has made statements that are very sympathetic to the, whatever you want to call them, isolationists or what have you, that don't want more military funding to go out the door to either Ukraine or to Israel. Is Donald Trump, if he's in that situation, in that interview chair, going to be willing to talk honestly about some of these issues, or not?
I would like to see Trump on Rogan to be pressed on some of the issues that clearly Rogan and the audience have a lot of investment in frankly, on the COVID front. On the, you can press Trump on, if he stands by Operation Warp Speed, if he stands by giving Fauci so much power, if he stands by even the temporary lockdowns that were implemented, or maybe he doesn't. Why did you then feud with the states when they started opening up? What was, would you have any regrets about that whole process? Those are questions that that he could be pressed on, that Rogan actually has some interest in. And so I would like to see him on the show. During a Veterans Day speech this Saturday, Trump called those on the left vermin that, quote, lie and steal and cheat on elections. Let's watch.
In honor of our great veterans on Veterans Day, we pledge to you that we will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country, that lie and steal and cheat on elections.
We should disclose that the election was not stolen. Don't know if we're still getting in trouble for refusing to put that disclaimer up there, but the election was won by Joe Biden. Trump's speech drew backlash from historians who said his rhetoric is, quote, reminiscent of authoritarians, including Hitler and Mussolini, according to reporting in the Washington Post.
Here's what former Biden White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said would happen if Trump regains presidential office.
Guess what? Joe Biden isn't perfect. No candidate is, by the way. But we have to understand what the alternative is here. If elected to a second term, Donald Trump would prosecute anyone he deems an enemy, unleash troops on protesters, and essentially unravel the rule of law as we know it. And this time, he plans to line his administration with people who will actually help him do it. But sure, Joe Biden is 3 years older and occasionally trips over things. Look, there's a lot to be concerned about right now when it comes to a second Trump term. The speeches are getting much more disturbing and much more unhinged, and we should all hear it that way.
Meanwhile, Trump's legal team will mount its defense in the civil fraud case against the former president's business empire. Today, according to The Hill, his team will attempt to prove to New York Judge Arthur Engoron that he should not have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in financial penalties to the state.
Well, that Jen Psaki clip is one of the most obvious examples of hand-waving, nothing to see here, folks, down to the gesture, nothing to see here, folks, that I've ever seen in my life. And I do think she's right about one thing. The age gap isn't really what it's about. It's not about his raw age. It's about his characteristics that people are attributing to his age, that they are observing a different man today than they saw 4 years ago, or that they saw when he was vice president. And they're concerned about what seems to be cognitive decline. He's less cogent than he used to be. He's less articulate than he used to be. He's less mobile than he used to be. And they're concerned that election seasons are grueling, that he's going to actually have to stump around the country if he wants to bring these numbers up. He's not going to have the benefit of running from the basement the way that he did in COVID. And they want to make sure, if everything all these people say about Trump is true, even if you take it on face value, he's Mussolini, whatever, then isn't that an argument to have the most capable representative on the Democratic ticket possible?
Yeah, and I saw a little preview of, I think, how many of the mainstream media are going to handle this, because I was watching CNN yesterday for just a few minutes, and when the Biden age subject came up, what they did is they had this ready to go. I think it was Jim Acosta had a reel of Trump gaffes, like a couple times in speech when he said that I think Viktor Orban was the president of Turkey rather than Hungary. He referred to Obama when he meant Biden. They had like a couple of these examples. And what they were trying to do is say, oh, if you have problems with Joe Biden's age, but Trump is just as out of it and just as incoherent, and look at all these times. I don't think that was remotely a fair comparison or a persuasive comparison. Certainly, Trump is also old, and he's said the wrong word a couple times. It's not the same level, I don't think, of incoherence. There's not nearly as much evidence. Look, he's an older man, too, and I'm sure he is tired a lot of the time and is in many ways not the strongest candidate for the Republican side, and they're going to be forced to have him anyway. But if the mainstream media is just going to approach this from a, look, they're both so old, and so you can't hold this against Biden because look at Trump, I don't think that's going to be persuasive at all.
Well, I also think that who are they trying to persuade? That's the question. It's Biden's own base that has concerns about his age.
Right.
Saying, but what about Trump? Those people don't want Trump either. They just want Biden not to be the Democratic nominee. That's, I think, what's so craven and kind of disappointing about the response from so many people in the Democratic establishment. They're acting like they're being gamed up by bad faith enemies when it's literally Democratic core-based voters that are saying, for one reason or another, either because of his age or his stamina or his lack of being able to articulate his ideas or his policy failures or his what they believe is a tacit and explicit, frankly, support of an ongoing genocide in the Middle East, that they don't want him to be the candidate. And instead, they're like, well, what about Trump? Those people are never going to vote for Trump. These are your voters. So you have to explain to the 70-odd% of Democratic voters who don't want Joe Biden why they should feel differently and why they shouldn't blame the Democratic Party for rigging this primary system, changing the order of the states in the way that's supposed to be advantageous to Joe Biden, having him not even run in New Hampshire, not allowing there to be any debates, shutting down the primary process preemptively. If they get stuck, if it ends up being the case that Donald Trump is the president of the United States of America, why shouldn't all of those Democratic voters who have been ringing the warning bells this entire time not put the blame squarely on the Democratic Party?
All right, we'll have more Rising right after this. Stay tuned.